Oh my God, he's not moving. The wolves are on him. Somebody do something before it's too late.
The scream echoed through the trees like it didn't belong in the world, like it had ripped a hole in something ancient and silent. It was mid-November in Saskatchewan, the snow packed tight in white like it had been ironed flat. Not a bird, not a sound, just the wind soft and cruel. When they found Kenton Carnegie's body near the frozen lake, there wasn't much left to question. Blood had painted the snow for yards. His body was dragged, chewed, pulled apart. And yet, his face still held a look of peace, like maybe, just maybe, he hadn't seen it coming, or he hadn't believed it would happen, even as it did. But the truly terrifying part, it wasn't a bear, it wasn't a freak accident, it wasn't even a storm. It was wolves. And not just any wolves, these were the ones he had spent weeks observing, photographing, trusting. He had walked among them. He believed they knew him, that somehow they accepted him. He believed wrong. But to understand what happened that afternoon, we need to go back to the beginning of Kenton's last walk. If stories like this keep you up at night or make your heart ache in all the right places, hit that subscribe button for Animal Story. We share true emotional and powerful tales from the wild, where loyalty, instinct, and tragedy collide. Don't miss what's coming next. Misha. Kenton Carnegie wasn't your average 22-year-old. He didn't spend weekends partying or glued to a screen. He was the kind of guy who would sit by a half-frozen creek for hours just to study the way light moved through pine needles. A senior studying environmental engineering at the University of Saskatchewan, Kenton, was on a field internship in one of the most remote places in North America, Point's North Landing. If you've never heard of it, that's the point. It's a place where the road ends and the wilderness begins. A cluster of buildings surrounded by endless forest, blanketed in snow half the year and ruled by silence and wolves. Kenton had always loved nature. From the time he was a kid growing up in Prince George, British Columbia, he'd wander the woods behind his house, barefoot, climbing trees, tracking raccoons, pretending he was a forest ranger. People called him the quiet one, but not in a weird way. More like he just listened harder than the rest of us. That's what made him so good at what he did. He didn't just study nature, he respected it. And that's what made what happened even harder to process. At the research camp, Kenton kept to his routines. Morning samples, noon notes, and late afternoon walks. Always solo, always without fear. He'd seen the wolves, a lot of people had. They'd been circling the trash dumps looking for scraps, getting bolder. Sometimes they came within 50 feet of the workers. One guy even said they looked like they were waiting for something. But Kenton wasn't afraid. He had this theory that animals sensed energy. If you were calm, they were calm. He even joked that he'd be fine living with a pack. Some of the other guys warned him, "Dude, don't go walking alone, not now. They're not pets. They're starving." But Kenton would just smile, tuck his camera into his coat, and head off down the trail, snow crunching under his boots like nothing in the world could touch him. And for a while, nothing did. But wolves learn fast, and hunger is louder than memory. There was something about Kenton Carnegie that made you pause. Maybe it was the way he spoke, gentle, measured, like every word mattered. Or maybe it was the way he looked at things. You know how most people see nature, Kenton felt it. Where others saw trees, he saw patterns. Where most people heard wind, he listened for rhythm. He believed the wilderness wasn't just out there, it was part of us. At 22 years old, Kenton was already the kind of person you'd expect to run a national park someday. He was studying environmental engineering at the University of Saskatchewan. Not exactly the career you choose if you're chasing money or recognition. Kenton wasn't chasing anything, he was following something. And in the fall of 2005, that something led him deep into the frozen forests of northern Canada, Point's North Landing. His internship was the kind of assignment most students passed on. Isolated, no cell signal, sub-zero temperatures. You're lucky if you see 5 people a week. But Kenton didn't hesitate. In fact, he seemed excited. No distractions, just him, his notebook, his camera, and the quiet. And of course, the wolves. They showed up early on silent shadows near the trash site just outside the research compound. Locals had seen them before, but never this close, never this bold. Most people kept their distance. Kenton, he brought his camera. He never tried to feed them, never tried to touch them. He just watched, observed, studied their movements, took notes in a little black notebook he always kept in his coat pocket. He gave them names based on markings. Scar ear, Bigfoot, ash eyes. He was fascinated by their pack dynamics, the way they moved in sync, the eerie intelligence in their eyes. To Kenton, they weren't monsters. They were misunderstood, like him. And maybe that's what drew him in so close. That feeling of kinship, that sense of connection. It's just a connection you can't explain to anyone else unless you felt it too. People at camp started to notice. "You're really into those wolves, huh?" Kenton would just smile. "They're not what people think." He had this unshakable belief that if you treated animals with respect, they'd respond in kind. That fear made them dangerous, but trust made them safe. There's something beautiful about that kind of faith, and something tragic. Because the thing about wild animals, especially apex predators, is that their rules aren't our rules. Their loyalty isn't emotional, it's biological. Their hunger doesn't care about the past. But Kenton believed. Every day after his duties, he'd head out alone into the trees, snow crunching under his boots, camera around his neck. He'd disappear into the tree line and come back before dusk with a calm on his face, like he'd just had a conversation with something older than time. And the wolves, they got used to him, stopped flinching when he came close, started watching him, following him even. From a distance, sure, but always there, like shadows that knew his scent. Some of the other interns started getting nervous. One guy, Tom, tried to talk to him. "Dude, you know these things could snap, right? They're wild, not your pets." Kenton shrugged. "I know what I'm doing." But there was one warning that should have hit different. A week before it happened, one of the mechanics got chased. Said he turned around and saw two wolves trotting behind him, just slow enough to keep pace, just close enough to be a threat. They backed off eventually, but it rattled him bad. "Man," he said later at dinner, "those things weren't curious. They were testing me." Still, Kenton kept walking, still believed, still trusted. He told one of the senior researchers, "If you treat them like enemies, they'll act like enemies. But if you show them you're not afraid, they'll respect that." It wasn't arrogance, not really. It was hope. Hope that the wild could understand us the way we long to understand it. But nature doesn't speak the language of hope. It speaks hunger, territory, instinct. And Kenton was about to learn that alone, and far too late. The first snowfall came early that year. It dusted the trees in white, covered the ground in silence, and made the world feel like a dream. For Kenton Carnegie, it was perfect. He said the snow made it easier to see tracks, easier to know who or what had passed through the woods before him. He'd started calling the wolves his silent neighbors. "They know me," he told a coworker. "I can feel it." And maybe he wasn't wrong, at least not entirely. The wolves did seem to recognize him. He wasn't just another human stomping through their world. He moved slower, quieter, less like a threat, more like part of the forest. He watched them for hours, took notes about their movements, their calls, their hunting patterns. Some nights, if the wind was right, he could hear them howling from his cabin. Most people found that sound haunting. Kenton, he'd smile and say it felt like a song, like a language he was getting closer to understanding. And little by little, people started to notice. Not just at the camp, but back home. Kenton had started sending photos and short journal entries to a wildlife blog. Nothing fancy, just grainy shots of wolves in the snow and quiet reflections about life in the north. But people responded. He got emails from strangers calling his writing peaceful, calming, even spiritual. He wasn't looking for fame, but his bond with the wolves was starting to feel like something bigger than just one man's fascination. It felt sacred. It was the kind of connection most of us dream about. The idea that we could truly understand a wild creature, that they might understand us back. But there's a dangerous illusion buried in that dream, the belief that understanding is the same as safety. And that illusion was about to crack. As winter settled in, things began to change. The wolves stopped circling the trash site. They came closer to the buildings now, bolder, hungrier. One was seen digging near a storage shed, another paced just 30 feet from the sleeping quarters. Still no attacks, but the tension was rising. One morning, a cook stepped outside to dump food scraps and found a wolf staring at him, silent, unmoving. He backed away slowly. Later, he said it wasn't curious. It looked like it was deciding something. And yet, Kenton didn't flinch. He still walked alone, still carried his notebook and camera like armor. When asked if he was worried, he just said, "They know I'm not a threat. They've had plenty of chances and they haven't done anything." And he was right. Up to that point, nothing had happened. But nature doesn't issue warnings in a way we always recognize. Sometimes a predator doesn't growl before it strikes. Sometimes it just waits until it doesn't. Kenton's last few journal entries hinted at something odd. Tracks circling back over my own. Not afraid anymore. Curious testing, same two wolves again. Gray and dark one. They followed me all the way to the ridge stopped when I turned around. No aggression, just watching. And finally, is it possible they see me as part of the pack? It sounds poetic, beautiful even. But the wild doesn't do poetry. It does patterns, behavior, hunger. The truth is Kenton may have become too familiar. Not just a human, not just an intruder, but something else entirely. And that may have been the most dangerous thing of all. The tracks were changing. That's what a senior technician at the camp quietly noted in his journal. The wolf prints weren't just passing by anymore. They were circling, looping back, getting tighter, closer, and always within reach of the human trails. At first, no one wanted to say it out loud. Wolves attacking humans, that just didn't happen. Not in North America, not under normal circumstances, not unless they were starving or rabid. And these wolves, they didn't look sick. They looked patient. Too patient, but Kenton didn't see it that way. He still headed out every afternoon like clockwork. Snowshoes strapped, notebook and pocket camera slung over one shoulder. People stopped warning him, not because they stopped worrying, but because he never listened. Kenton, you hear that mechanic got chased the other day? They're just testing boundaries. You're not worried. I'd know if something was wrong. But here's the thing, sometimes you don't. Sometimes danger doesn't roar. It doesn't hiss or growl or wear a mask. Sometimes it moves in silence, watches from the tree line, and waits. The camp cook, a big guy named Ed, had his own run-in. He went out one morning to dump the trash and stop cold because standing 15 feet from the dumpster was a large gray wolf, just standing there, not snarling, not backing away, just staring. It wasn't scared, Ed said later. It was thinking. I could feel it. It rattled him so much that management held a brief safety meeting. The takeaway? Stay in pairs. Don't leave the cleared paths. Don't go out after dusk. And whatever you do, don't feed the wolves. But the real problem wasn't garbage or footpaths. It was familiarity. These wolves had been around humans too long. They'd lost their fear and gained something else: comfort, confidence, and maybe even a strategy. Someone noticed Kenton's trail that week. His snowshoe prints had been overlapped by paw prints in multiple places. And not just once every day. The wolves weren't just crossing his path, they were following it. One intern pointed it out on a map. They're not wandering anymore. They're tracking him. Still, Kenton brushed it off. He'd seen worse in field studies. Thought maybe they were curious. Maybe they recognized him and were playing it safe by shadowing from a distance. They know me, he said again. But what if they did? What if they knew him so well they stopped seeing him as a threat or a friend? What if to them Kenton had become just another animal in the snow? In the wild, there's a moment just before a predator acts when everything is still, when the wind quiets and your instincts scream even though you can't see anything. That moment had been building for days, and no one felt it more than a man named Jason, another researcher at the camp. He wasn't close to Kenton, but he'd seen the change in the wolves and in Kenton too. He stopped looking at them like animals, Jason said later, started talking about them like family. And then there was the last morning. Kenton walked out of the main cabin just after lunch. It was a gray day, overcast, quiet. He had his camera, he had his boots, he had that same calm look on his face. Jason watched him go. You sure about this? Kenton smiled. It's just a walk. It was the last time anyone saw him alive. It was November 8th, 2000, just another Tuesday, cold, quiet sky, the color of ash. Kenton grabbed his gear after lunch. Nobody stopped him because by now nobody could. He'd made up his mind. This was routine, normal, his daily ritual, his daily walk into the woods, make notes, find peace. He was wearing his heavy parka, carried his small Nikon camera, had his leather-bound journal in his coat pocket like always, the only thing he didn't carry. He called a weapon, because Kenton didn't believe he'd need one. He walked north toward the lake. No one else went that way anymore. The wolves had been sighted too often, too close. But Kenton believed in the bond, believed it would hold, and that belief cost him everything. The sun dipped behind a cloud bank by mid-afternoon. It got colder fast. A slight wind picked up over the ridge. When Kenton didn't return by 4 o'clock, nobody panicked yet. But by 5, Jason noticed something. Kenton's boots were gone. His coat was gone. But his flashlight still sat on the gear bench. Strange. By 6, the sun was gone and the cold bit harder. That's when Ed, the camp cook, said, "Something's wrong." They formed a quick search party, just 2 guys, flashlights, and nerves they pretended were calm. They followed the path north. Kenton's snowshoe tracks were easy to spot at first, but a half-mile in things changed. Suddenly, the path was broken, overwritten, paw prints, big ones, multiple sets, leading in one direction, then dragging back the other. And then blood, just a few drops at first, scattered. But then it became more smeared, splashed dark against the white snow. One of them gagged, the other went silent. They found him near the edge of the frozen lake, face down, still, surrounded by paw prints in every direction. His coat had been torn open, one boot missing, deep lacerations around his neck and torso, defensive wounds on his arms. There was no sign of a fall, no cliff, no bear, no accident. This had been a coordinated kill. The wolves had circled, waited, and then struck fast, violent, and without mercy. Forensic experts would later confirm it. Kenton had been alive when it began. He died of blood loss and shock within minutes. No chance to scream, no time to run. Just a slow realization, perhaps, that the rules had changed and whatever bond he thought they shared wasn't real anymore. Back at camp, no one spoke much. People cried, people packed. Some refused to go outside again, not even to the bathroom shack. The news spread fast. A human killed by wolves in North America. That wasn't just rare, it was almost unheard of. The initial reports sparked confusion. Was it really wolves? Could it have been a bear or a fall? But the evidence was too clear. Tracks, teeth, flesh, drag marks. Signs of a group attack. No bluff, no hesitation. They hunted him, they took him, and they finished it. The wilderness doesn't make apologies. It doesn't explain itself. It just moves on. The snow kept falling that night, covered the tracks, softened the horror. By morning, you couldn't tell anything had happened there at all. But the people who found him, they would never forget. Not the silence, not the red in the snow, not the betrayal. Because that's what it felt like. A betrayal of trust, of belief, of love even. They airlifted Kenton's body out 2 days later. The wolves were long gone by then. No bodies, no collars, no names, just silence. A cold, brutal reminder that the wilderness keeps no graves. The official cause of death: predatory attack by wild canids, most likely wolves. It was the first confirmed fatal wolf attack on a human in modern North American history. And it shook everyone from biologists to bush pilots to Kenton's own family to their core. Because it shattered a belief most of us want to hold on to. That wild animals don't hurt people unless they're provoked. That love for nature protects you from it. That knowing something means controlling it. But nature doesn't care what we believe. In the months that followed, the story spread. News outlets picked it up. Some ran with sensational headlines: "Wolves kill student in Canada." Others tried to spin it into a conservation debate. Wildlife activists pushed back: "Don't let one tragedy define a species." But inside scientific circles, the tone shifted. This wasn't just a fluke. This was a wake-up call. Investigators reviewed the site, found that food waste had been left unsealed for weeks. Wolves had been scavenging near the camp for months. Some had even begun tailing workers during daytime walks. In other words, they were adapting, getting bolder, smarter, less afraid. The government issued new regulations. Trash sites had to be secured. Wildlife awareness training became mandatory in remote stations. No more solo walks, no more silent assumptions. Because the moment fear leaves the predator is the moment instinct takes over. As for Kenton, his family never blamed the wolves. His parents released a short statement. Kenton loved the natural world. He died in the place he loved most, doing what he believed in. We only hope others learn from this. They didn't want vengeance. They wanted understanding. But understanding doesn't bring someone back. At a small memorial held on his university campus, a professor said something that stuck with everyone there. Kenton saw beauty in the wild, but beauty is not the same as safety, and the wild is never ours to tame. In the end, Kenton's story isn't just about wolves. It's about trust, about limits, about the dangerous romance we sometimes build between man and nature. He believed he had formed a connection that could not be broken. But the truth is, nature doesn't recognize friendship. It recognizes patterns: hunger, weakness, territory. And when the balance tips, even love can be prey. Then some call what happened a tragedy. Others call it a lesson. Maybe it's both. But one thing is certain, that snowy trails Kenton walked so many times, that path he thought was familiar, safe, even sacred, became the last place he ever stood. And now the only footprints left are in memory. So now we leave the question with you. Do you believe love and respect are enough to silence a predator's instinct? Or are we lying to ourselves when we try to humanize the wild? Tell us in the comments. And if this story moved you, subscribe to Animal Story. We share true emotional and haunting encounters where people step beyond the fence and nature shows its teeth.